There we go. Welcome, everyone. My name is Craig Gardner, and I've got Ryan Moffett online to assist in running the meeting. The topic today is preparing for hardware changes and software updates. We have a pretty good sized group, so please remain muted. We'll have a Q&A at the end of the presentation, and at that time, I can call on people who indicate in chat that they have a question or read off the questions that you present in chat. And with that, let's get started. So the turnout's pretty good, and I think some of it may have to do with the vagueness of my title, and that unfortunately was necessary. Preparing for hardware changes and software updates does not lend itself to specificity. But in the next couple of slides, I hope to shed some light on what I'm going to be talking about today. There we go. So my introduction is when planning hardware changes and software updates, there are going to sometimes be prerequisites, potential pitfalls, and best practices to be aware of. Proper planning can avoid delays and complications. So still a little vague, but I created this presentation after witnessing and experiencing situations where there were difficulties and differences in expectations in the preparation for an update or an upgrade. So my goal today is to share and discuss a collection, which will by no means be comprehensive, of some processes, guidelines, and scenarios that will hopefully prove helpful down the road when you're planning something similar. So here are the topics I will be discussing, which will hopefully lend a little more idea of what we're going to be talking about today. So one of the main things I want to, reinforce today is the importance of backing up database files. So you're going to see that pop up several times throughout the presentation. After that, we're going to talk about field equipment, which is RWs, Phantoms, Wiis. We're going to talk about the operating system that a lot of these field equipments utilize. And we're going to talk a little bit about the process and for updating Winboard Embedded, just to kind of cover those bases. Next, for a better part of the presentation, we'll jump into the meter shop environment. That'll encompass equipment like your test boards, 2000, 4000, etc. And then the software used to control them, like Winboard 2, aka Legacy, Winboard 3, and WattNet. And a little bit about the process of updating WattNet, etc. So first, to borrow a line or paraphrase a line from a movie, the first 3 rules of Update Club are back up your database. It is important, sometimes overlooked, sometimes not thought of prior to an update. So database files, they store all of your test results, your test sequences, site information, import and export definitions, custom meter forms, barcode definitions, the works. So very important files. You want to make sure you have backup copies before you make any changes to your system. So in the same theme of backing up databases, I've got a little set of graphics here where I'm showing for some of these where those files are located. Generally, at least for these examples, those files can just be copied to another location and saved in case. So the first one, Winboard Embedded, that's for your field test equipment, like your Phantom, your Wiis, your RWs. Next is Winboard 2, aka Legacy, same file path as used for Winboard Embedded, but a different file name. And then last, we've got Winboard 3 and WattNet. Those are the ones that use the Microsoft SQL database structure. And the reason I've got a couple things, let's see, can you still hear me? I just got a, Ryan, can you still hear me? Sorry, I got a pop-up that said I had trouble connecting to a network, so I didn't know if I lost anyone.
You're good.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, it's a worrying message to see that you're not connected. So apologize for that disruption. So back to the Winboard 3 WattNet backup locations. There's a couple sections of this file path highlighted, and that's because depending on your installation of Microsoft SQL Server, you may be in the non-x86 folder in the file structure, and also depending on what version of Microsoft SQL Server you're using, that second segment of highlighted text may be different because that has some version information in there. So now I'm going to transition into field equipment, and I know this is kind of an interesting slide to segue into field equipment because I'm showing a timeline of when different operating systems, different versions of Windows were prevalent. But I'm going to keep it up here while I discuss some things. And one of the main reasons it's here is because inside most of our field test equipment, like your Bantams, the Bantam Pluses, the RWs and Wii's, they contain a true to the term computer inside. And they run a Windows operating system. And depending on when yours was purchased, it may have XP, it may have 7, it may have 10. And there is no issue with running XP, for example, on a Bantam if it's, if there's, no loss in functionality, no need to update to a different operating system until you get to a point where IT says, if you're going to connect this to the company network, we need to be on a current operating system. So that's usually going to be the driver for upgrading to Windows 10 from a 7 or XP system, is when pretty much your organization dictates it. And as anyone who knows, or anyone who's worked within computers knows, hardware and software are evolving all the time. And that is also true of our equipment and what computer hardware is in our field test equipment with, used to run, Winboard embedded, which runs the tester's functions. So over time, as many of you know, you can get computer hardware that will no longer support software, and Microsoft is notorious for being, kind of particular in what you need to do to run your software. So the next slide here, based on how long your piece of equipment has been in your possession and what computer hardware is installed in it, you might need a hardware upgrade to coincide with an operating system upgrade. Just reach out to us if you're in a situation where you need to upgrade the operating system on a field test unit, and let us help you decide what it will take to get that update completed. So that's another kind of a heads up of, you need an operating system upgrade. There might be a little bit more involved than face value would imply. So let me just briefly go over the process of updating Winboard Embedded, because depending on whether or not your field equipment is able to be connected to the internet, that process is slightly different. The most straightforward method is if you can get connected to an internet connection. And of course, before you do that, back up the database. That previous slide showed the path, the file name, copy that to a desktop, copy it to a thumb drive, copy it somewhere before you perform your update. And if you're connected to the internet, you can go into Winboard Embedded, the main screen. There's a button for utilities, updates, backup, and restore, and then check for updates. That will prompt the equipment to reach out to a Radian server, check for the most recent version of software available, compare it, and prompt you through the update process if required. Now, if you don't have access to the internet with that piece of equipment, there is a manual version. Still back up the database, still very important. You can reach out to us and we can provide a link to the latest update file on your PC that's internet connected. Download that file, get it onto a USB drive, transfer it to the piece of field equipment, and then run it manually. A note I'd like to make is I've been told if you're connected to the network with the field equipment, but still downloaded the install file for some reason, don't try and run the install file over a network connection. It should be transferred either onto a thumb drive or onto the piece of field equipment itself, or else you might run into issues. So now I'm going to dive into the meter shop environment. And before I get into the other topics I listed, I'd like to talk a little bit about a feature known as auto open. Some of you may use it, some of you may not. It's great when, to save a little bit of a time to jump into the connection with the test board. But if anything happens with communication between the test board and the PC, which may happen during an update, it starts to work against you a little bit. So what I would recommend is if you're planning to, update your software, change which board is connected to what PC, anything like that, go in and, in your Winboard screen, do your find test boards where it lets you, modify your connections and disable that temporarily. Because what can happen is if something happens to interfere with that communication between the PC and the test board, it will still try, and it will continue to try. I've seen some situations where it'll just time out and give you a message, but I've seen other times where it will continuously try until you Control-Delete WATnet. So with that in mind, it's best to kind of disable that, make your changes, make your updates, get everything configured, make sure everything is happy, then turn it on and you're good to go. So I just wanted to throw that out there as another thing that you want to be aware of when doing any changes to your setup. So you might already be aware, but if you're not, this is a good heads up. If you've got a 2000 series test board and running Winboard 2, Winboard 3 and WATnet, any of those in the suite, they have an Ethernet communication requirement. So the original 2000 series boards were only, equipped with a serial cable connection for communication. So if you're contemplating going from Winboard 2 to WATnet, another thing you're going to have to plan for is upgrading that 2000 series board to Ethernet communication. And depending on the age of the board and what other hardware it contains, there may be some other things that need to be updated to make communication work properly as well. If you're planning that kind of an update, reach out to us. We can let you know what you need to check and what you need to take care of. There's my mouse. So now I want to talk a little bit about the different versions of Winboard and the upgrade path. As you can see on this little graphic here, Winboard 2 is the oldest, Winboard 3, WATnet suite, of course, that's the progression of generations. And Winboard 2 was built on a Sybase database structure. And what happened when we moved beyond that was there was some concern that Microsoft wasn't going to support Sybase database structure anymore. So the decision was made to transition to Microsoft SQL. The unfortunate side effect of that is anyone transitioning forward from Winboard 2, there's a necessary data conversion exercise that needs to be performed to get your data. If you want it, because there are some people who don't keep their stuff in the database. But if you're wanting to preserve that data, we're going to need to dive in and perform a database conversion service to get that data from the Sybase structure up to the SQL structure. So something you'll definitely want to be aware of if anything happens and you're like, hey, we want to go to WATNet today. There's going to be some time and effort involved in making that happen. So another just heads up. So why upgrade? Most importantly is that Winboard 2, aka Legacy, was declared end of life in December of 2019. So about a year and a half ago-ish. And so that if you're happy with it, that's fine. You can still use it and we'll still support it. But at some point, Microsoft, continually making updates, may change something that interferes with the proper operation of Winboard 2. So, and at that point, it will be out of our control. You know, Microsoft changes the operating system, Winboard 2 stops working. That's going to be a hard stop for Winboard 2. So keep that in mind when planning your future, software needs. Whereas, WATNet, the WATNet suite is, currently that's our active version, continually coming out with releases that are keeping up with Microsoft Windows updates, adding new features and functionality, and improving performance as time goes by. So to update, oops, let me go back. There we go, sorry about that. If you're already on WATNet, like say you're on BASIC and you have version 1 or 4.1.1128 and you want to, go to the latest version, there's a couple different ways to do that. And I just want to make some comments about this where things to be aware of. So if you're running BASIC, which is only a local database, or if you're running a higher tier, Express, etc., and you're only using it in a local database, setup, then it's just at your discretion. Automatically check for updates can be enabled, and just go for it. But if automatically check for updates is enabled, I would still recommend back up the database. So what happens when this feature is enabled? When you launch WATNet, it comes up with a pop-up. Comes up with a pop-up that says, hey, there's a new version out there. Do you want it? So if you haven't backed up your database recently, I would recommend you say no, close WATNet, back up the database, reopen WATNet, and when that prompt comes up then, say yes and let it walk you through the update process. And if you have that disabled and want to check for the update manually, still back it up, important. Then in the lower left hand corner of WATNet, there's a help button, and then on the next screen there'll be an about link, and at the top at the screen there's a blue ribbon, and there'll be a check for updates button, which will kick off the same thing the other prompt would have done. And this is something I've seen a few times, an error message like this. And what this usually indicates is that your organization has some network security in place that is blocking the download of the installation or update file. I think it's a .msi extension if you're curious. So if you ever get this message when trying to run an update, let us know. It may be as simple as sending you like a zip file version of the download file and running it after that. And usually that fixes it. If not, we'll work with you on what needs to be done. So the previous slides were more about, like I said, BASIC, which is only a local, WattNet is on your computer, the database is on your computer. Everything is, contained in the same system. When you get into a situation like with Express or above, because BASIC doesn't offer a central server setup, if you have a central server configuration, you'll want to approach an update a little differently. And the reason is when you perform an update to WattNet, the WattNet installer will actually reach out to the SQL database and manipulate it and update it as well. So if you have multiple systems touching the same database, you don't necessarily want to be updating that database with one installation while someone else is saving meter test results to the same database. So it should be a coordinated effort. Involve your IT, involve your, whoever's in charge of your system. And so the best approach would be to close all instances of WattNet, back up the database. When you know that's done, update them one at a time. You don't want multiple stations trying to reach out and talk to the database to query it or perform an update at the same time. Another note on that, the first one might take a little longer than the others, and the reason is the first one that's actually going to do the database update, it'll reach out, say, what version are you need to update, and so it goes through that process. Subsequent updates will query it, oh, you're the version I need you to go to, I'm done with you, and move on. And if you're in a central server setup, that automatically check for updates feature, you might want to disable that to avoid any database mismatch errors. And that option is in System Options, and then I think it's the top checkbox. Because what might happen is sometimes there's a pop-up window, sometimes the tendency to say, yes, let me update. But if you've got a multiple system structure, if one updates, it's going to reach out, update the database, and then another person may log in and that version of WattNet saying, hey, I'm supposed to be talking to database version 121. I'm seeing 124. What's going on? So to avoid that happening, it would be best in a central server setup to keep that automatic prompt for an update disabled and manage that manually. So this is a kind of a sparse slide, but that's because some of, the part about migrating to a new PC has already been touched, is like back up the database, get your new software in place, back up the database. But I wanted to mention it because there's situations where if you have a 2000 series test board and you were running on Winboard 2, if you're going to go to another system, another PC, and I'm going to talk about this more in a little bit, there are CAL files, which I'll talk about in the next slide, that are related with Winboard 2 and 2000 series test boards that were saved on the PC. So you want to make sure those are preserved as well. And let me talk about those CAL files here briefly. First of all, there's calibration in the name calibration file, of course, but to be clear, these files are not going to affect a meter test accuracy. It's not related to what the internal standard is recording, versus the meter. That comparison still happens, aside from the calibration file. Where the CAL file does play a role is in the 2000 series boards. It affects the metrics displayed at in Winboard or at the bottom of WattNet on the meter test screen. So that's its purpose for those 2000 series boards. It's just to dial in those metrics at the bottom, your currents, voltages, and phase angles. And the reason it's only 2000 series boards is because in the newer 4000 series boards, the metrics in the software are tied directly to the standard. There's no intermediary hardware. It's just a direct line, whereas in the 2000 series boards, I believe it's some low generation hardware is involved, and that's why those CAL files are where they are. CAL files are generated when a test board 2000 series is manufactured, or they can be actually create new files at a later time by running Cal 95. There's a test within Cal 95 you can run to recreate a Cal file. These are most often seen in Winboard 2, and they're stored on the PC. And that's why when you move to a new PC, it's kind of, you want to either keep an eye out for those or be prepared to use Cal 95 to create new ones. The path on where they're stored is right there, WECO apps, Winboard. And then the file naming convention here is WECO TB1. That would correlate to Station 1. If you had a Station 2, there would be a file called WECO TB2. Now, if you upgrade a 2000 series board to Ethernet, the Ethernet card can actually store that CAL file, and ideally, it would be good to save that CAL file to the Ethernet card and keep a copy somewhere else if you don't want to use Cal 95 to recreate it, if anything should happen where that Ethernet card needs to be replaced. And I brought this up just because the nomenclature in Cal 95, it's a little confusing just because read and write. You've got two things involved here. That's the Ethernet card on the test board and your computer. In this situation, read means to read from the Ethernet card and save it to your PC. Write means to take it from your PC, save it to the Ethernet card. So I just wanted to clarify that nomenclature because I know it can be confusing. So I know this has been a bit of a all over the place presentation with topics just because I was trying to give a broad spectrum of different examples of what you might run into in an update or an upgrade process. Just examples of, hey, there might be things out there that we need to account for, may not be obvious. So please reach out to us, your sales rep, your regional solutions manager, and ask us, hey, I'm getting ready to do X, what do I need to look out for? How do I make sure this goes smoothly? Let us help you, and we'll make sure that happens. And please back up the database. Can't say it enough. So at this time, I'd like to begin taking questions. We've got about 60 people in the meeting, so to avoid talking over one another, please type it in the chat window or type in chat that you have a question, and we'll answer the questions that we see crop up or call on you to pose your question. So anyone got anything for me? Ryan, can you, is there a benefit to upgrading from Winboard 3 to the latest? To get a comprehensive version of that answer, I would have to probably consult to the software team. But in general, the newest version is going to have all the latest features in place. It's going to have any fixes that were implemented are going to be in the latest version. So that's the main benefit, is to stay current. But I can see if there's anything else to the Winboard 3 to WattNet, as far as major benefits to moving forward that might be beyond the obvious current, most advanced, etc. How long will Winboard 3 support it? Well, we still support Winboard 2, if that's any indication. And the hard line with Winboard 2 is because of, Windows. You know, it's on an antiquated database structure. It may run into a situation where Windows just ceases to work. Winboard 3, you know, we may not make a fix for anything, but we will definitely keep, you know, if you have a problem, we'll help you troubleshoot. We can give you a new install file, etc. So in that sense, it will be supported for a very long time. Let's see, another question. I recently had my RW31X upgraded to Windows 10. New SSD and Winboard was updated. Yeah, from reading the rest of your question, let's, Ryan, if you could capture that question and we can reach out to Farhan to pursue that further. We can definitely take that offline, Farhan, because that sounds like a unique problem there. Let's see, how do I connect to the right COM port when finding a new test port? Let me expand the chat because there's getting to be more questions here. A note about the COM port, when you go into the Winboard section, let's see, who is this? Sakabur, I probably butchered that, I'm sorry. Are you talking about Winboard 2? Are you talking about WattNet? Because in WattNet, when you find a test board, there's a drop down for a COM port. And this may not be answering your specific question, but I want to bring it up anyway. When you find a test board in WattNet, there'll be a drop down for COM ports. The only purpose that serves is when you are using a third-party software like MeterCat to talk through WattNet, connect to the test board, and use our optical coupler to program meters. We have a driver that comes with WattNet that emulates a COM port so that you can pick a COM port in something like MeterCat to talk to that read-write device to communicate with the meters. So we would need to, you know, just to say that doesn't have to be picked. That's, I guess, my point. You don't have to pick that if you're not programming meters with third-party software. Now, if you're having a specific problem where you're having trouble communicating with the test board, we will do our best to reach out to you. Let's see. On board. Or Ryan, if you could try and capture that too. We can reach out and discuss what might be going on there. Okay, you did write it in there, okay. Let's see, another question I see. Do you recommend upgrading from Winboard 3 to WattNet? Of course, the obvious knee-jerk response is yes, but definitely reach out and talk to us about your specific needs. We'll see if there's any specific conditions that would make it better to stay where you are. But it's easy to say yes, but there's always going to be, you know, an exception where something might not be the best course. So we can talk about that. Let's see, Patrick. Yes, this presentation, if you're here, you should be emailed a link once it's available. I think that's how it works still. If not, what we'll do is eventually we take these recordings when we get them, and if they're deemed worthy, post them on our website. So I would imagine this one will be on our website. I can't give you the exact time frame, but I think just being in this meeting now, you should get a link once it's available. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong. Do you know, Ryan, is that correct?
That is correct. There should be an email invite after this to the recording of the meeting from WebEx
Okay.
once it's been finalized through WebEx's servers.
Okay.
And
I
if,
thought so,
and if
but
not, and for some reason, if somebody's wanting a recording of this, let us know, as what Craig's saying, and if we have that recording available to you, we can get that to you.
thanks, Ryan. And I see you just typed a response to Ken that he may be in a unique situation where the upgrade to WATNet might need to be discussed further. There's always exceptions to every rule. Let's see, Ryan, have any questions been typed to you that I'm not seeing?
Not currently.
Okay. Thank you for the questions. The last presentation I did, it was cricket, so I appreciate the interest. So I will give it about 15 seconds more or so to see if any other questions come up. Okay, here's another question. Are test sequences from Winboard 3 compatible with WATNet test sequences? Ryan, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe so.
So if you're going from Winboard 3 to our newer WATNet suite that we've talked about today, and making that jump over, those databases are compatible, and those test sequences are also compatible. So if one station is running one instance while one's running the other, you should be able to import and export those test sequences to and from stations. And that goes with anybody using WATNet Basic as well. So if you have any kind of data or configuration that you've done on one local instance, but you have person 2 over here really wants person's 1 configuration, likely we can go ahead and transfer any kind of test sequences and other things from one station to the other. So if you have any kind of specific questions on that, or if you're looking to move specific data, again, you can reach out to myself, Craig, and the rest of us, and we should be able to help you kind of figure out what data you want to get over and how best to do that.
All right, did that answer your question? Oh, you just said thank you. Thank you. Let's see, after the upgrade, would there be constantly firmware updates that would need to be? Bradley, if you could clarify, which upgrade are you talking about? Are you talking, because I've talked about a lot of different upgrades. Are you talking about field test unit hardware update or what? So like on a field test unit? And I guess speaking to that generally, I would imagine that, you know, there's always improvements being made. There's always going to be software releases coming. And so software, yes. Firmware, I would imagine those would be less frequent. I wouldn't use the word constant, but I wouldn't be surprised if, you know, sometimes there are firmware updates. Okay, RW30. So a couple different models in question. Ryan, what would you say is the frequency of like a firmware update for a unit? Because I know generally if there's a firmware update, if on a field test unit, there's rarely, if ever, Ryan, do you know, a time where it would be requested to come in? It would more be a situation where you send something in for a RMA or a accuracy recertification. We may find, hey, this thing's a little, you know, behind. You know, we can run some updates. I believe that's how we handle that. Correct, Ryan?
That's correct for some of the older equipment. Nowadays, as of right now, if you go out and update your latest RW, Bantam, or any test board that's running with and alongside WattNet, those units will automatically have their firmware updated if you have the software up to date as well. So if we go through what Craig discussed today, keep your software up to date and all that, our latest releases of WattNet will update the firmware of components inside of your test board. So if, let's say, for example, you have a new 4050X, you may have had it for a few years, you get the update to WattNet, that will update the firmware of your amplifiers, your other potential routing boards, and other components inside of that to the latest firmware. So again, maintaining your software is one thing, but as of today, what we have implemented is it will also update firmware for the internal RX reference standards for your RWXs, Bantam Plus as well, and the 4000 series test boards. So, and I want to clarify one thing I just said too. 4000 and 4000X test boards and RWX units will have up-to-date firmware. The Bantams and the RWs with the RD standards, we can provide those to you through a update file. But if you're running a specific version of firmware, you're not going to lose functionality from older to newer firmware for those units. So if you have a specific question on if you're needing an update as well, let us know. But also with the newer versions, if you're running an unsupported older firmware version, it will tell you when you try to launch that new software, hey, minimum required firmware is this, and then you can get with us and we can provide that firmware update to you and walk you step by step on how to do that out in the field.
Thanks, Ryan. And thank you, Bradley, for letting me know that answered your question. Any other questions? Give it another 15 seconds for anyone else to chime in. Okay, here's another one from William Tang. Do you recommend a database detachment for backup or backup restore approach to backup an SQL server? I think correct me if I'm wrong, Ryan, but I think it's an either or. I mean, I don't know about a full detachment, but I know there's a method in SQL to create a backup, but the simply copying the files works fine. Ryan, do you have anything to add to that?
No, both are valid options as long as you have the ability to maintain and access a version of that database, whether it is through SQL or a physical file. As long as you have a backup in some fashion, that's what's important.
Does that answer your question, William? All right, thank you. Anything else? Good questions. Give it a little longer. All righty, I don't see any more questions, so unless any last minute come in, we'll wrap up here. Let me get this going. There we go. So let me get to the thingy. So thank you very much. Thank you everyone for attending. If you have any questions that you think of later or didn't want to ask in this format, please email it to us at technicalsupport@radianresearch.com or call us at 765-449-5576, or you can visit our website at radianresearch.com. We enjoy being your solutions partner, and we look forward to working with you on these and other topics. And I hope you have a great day, and I hope to see you at our next presentation. Thank you all very much.